Hey guys, I'm super excited. Today I have my friend Henry Kramer. I found him on Instagram. I've been wanting to talk about ecology and nature and philosophy and all that stuff for a while, and I just loved his page and what he stood for, and so I had a chat with him, and super interested in everything we had to talk about, and so yeah, thanks for coming on, Henry.
Yeah, of course. No, it's super excited to be here. I guess I should just introduce myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, so I am really passionate about the intersection of spirituality, imagination, wonder, and the non-human world, the more than human world. I always have been. And yeah, you found me through Instagram. So I run a page there called Enchanted Ecology, where I try to instill this idea that we can enchant the world, that the world that surrounds us has sort of been flattened by our accustomed acculturated modes
Mm.
of perception, and we have this sort of veil over our eyes with how we look at things. And I knew you asked, you wanted a little bit of my background. So
Right.
I have my undergrad degree in the psychological dimensions of religion, which is a totally made up BS degree that I
I've never heard of
collaborated
that.
with yeah, I'm the one person with it. 100% of people with psychological dimensions of religion get a job in the field. So it's a great degree if you want to. Yeah. Um, yeah. So it was because I did a program for
Mm.
interdisciplinary
Oh,
invented
right.
majors. So
Mhm.
I got that through there, and originally thought I was going to study philosophy and psychology because I was interested in the big questions and why we
Mm.
ask them.
Right.
And then I took some classes in religious studies and realized that when it's taught well, the questions that surround religion and spirituality are those questions, those big
Mm.
metaphysical questions, and why we care, what in us draws us to them, what in us wakes up in response to those philosophical openings. And so that was my undergrad. And then I went to Montana and I got two master's degrees, one in environmental philosophy and another in eco-critical literature, which is basically environmental literature. I think of it, it occupies a similar domain as something like if you were to get a degree in like post-colonial literature or like feminist critique or
Hmm.
something. It's just the
Hmm.
environmental emphasis on how the things we create in culture um, express certain attitudes or perspectives towards the environment
Mm.
and how
Right.
that's shaped by culture. So
Hmm.
yeah, I did and we can get into this in more detail, I'm sure, in whatever way you want. My undergrad honors project was on what I call the deep imagination, which is
Mm.
the things that upwell from the imagination that we do not own or control. And
Like
I
the
talk about
unconscious.
the unconscious. Exactly.
Right. Got
I
it.
talk about improvisation and how when we let things out spontaneously, they come from a part of us that we do not have domain over. And I also talk about
Mm.
Carl Jung in the Red Book.
Oh,
And
beautiful.
I have it right here. I've had
Every
it
time
for
you
over a
talk,
decade.
you just add more stuff that I'm into as well. So
Oh
that's great.
man, Kendall, with your first message and you were talking about wanting to discuss idealism. That's something that I've been getting into
Mm.
in a very unexpected way lately. I was very surprised to see that there. There's so many things in what in your questions that I was like, oh man, this is gonna be fun. Um, yeah, so I that was my undergrad project, and my environmental philosophy master's thesis was on the phenomenology of wonder. So
Hmm.
what exactly is wonder? What is wonder like? What is the experience of wonder
Mm.
on a deeply subjective,
Mm.
looking inward way? Because phenomenology is that branch of philosophy that asks not like metaphysics, what is the world made of, or
Mm.
what exists out there, or like ethics, what ought we do, how ought we live, but asks instead, what is it like? What is it like to be human? That was Heidegger's big
Mm.
question. Or what is it like to be a bat? That which is a paper by Thomas Nagel. And so I'm really interested in what is it like to feel wonder? What is it like to experience the imagination? What is it like to be enchanted? What is it like to be more vitally alive than we feel
Mm.
ourselves to be most of the time? And like what, because it Yeah, I could just keep going. I feel like if I stop here and let you
No,
jump in with more specifics, that'll help guide me. But yeah,
yeah, no, that's
great.
great. Actually, my first vacation with my family
Mm.
was to Montana and the Glacier National Park, and it was just
Oh, it's
gorgeous.
gorgeous there.
First 14er climb, saw a mountain goat. Just
Hmm.
going along that road, and there's just mounds of snow on each side, like a wall. Yeah, it was
Wow.
amazing. And we've gone on a lot of more vacations. We usually like to go somewhere in nature and mountains, and so that's a great place to
Oh,
study environmental things.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
You mentioned mountain goats. I love, like, they're so funny to me because the way that they can stand, like, really,
Right.
the way they just walk through. I've seen some videos. I've seen some out there too
Walking
in
on the side of
Yellowstone, and
cliffs, and you're just like, how
yeah,
do they do that?
it really, and the casualness with which they do it. I mean, you
Hmm.
can look at their face, they are totally unimpressed with what they're doing. They're just like, this is, what are you looking at? What are you looking at, you
Hmm.
silly little human? You can't do this. What do you mean? I It really reminds you how many ways there are to experience the world. Like, that looks
Hmm.
like a cliff to us. That would be a huge challenge
Right.
to them. It's a Saturday.
Right. Right. Yeah. And thinking about my own journey, I mean, I think that was a big part of it as far as like me getting into nature and ecology. Also in undergrad, I was an English major and I was
Mm,
doing Lord of the Rings. I was a huge fan. And a lot of the research I was researching about was on ecology and the environment and how Tolkien was so, into nature and kind of gave a bad light on technology and that
mm.
yeah, that disconnection or the destruction of nature. So I think it just sparked my interest even more. So uh yeah, and I love that the psychological dimensions of religion. That sounds amazing. My grad I was in grad school for psychology for a while, and at the same time I was going through my spiritual journey, so I was kind of getting that side by side a little bit. So uh I think that's all great.
I'm so excited that you mentioned Tolkien.
Mhm.
Um, I there's this woman, Becca Tarnas, who's the daughter of Richard Tarnas, who used to teach at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche.
Mhm.
His daughter has a talk called The Red Book and the Red Book, and it's about the Red Book of Westmarch, which is what the
Oh,
in-universe
right.
version of
Mhm.
the Lord of the Rings is. That's what
Mhm.
Frodo was writing in, and
Right.
Bilbo before him. And uh or I think it was. I think, did he write
Yes.
the Red Book, or was that an
No,
after
he did.
he was the one that wrote it? It was
Trust me
Frodo.
as a
Yeah.
nerd on that.
Yeah. And Carl Jung's Red Book, and the
Mhm.
the the deep imaginal nature of Middle Earth as a
Mhm.
character. And I one of my favorite Tolkien quotes is actually from his 1937 essay on fairy stories. And he speaks about enchantment. And what I love about this quote, which I'm going to get approximately right, but not perfectly
Sure.
right, is it really brings in ourselves into the feeling of enchantment. It's not just, and fantasy. He says fairy contains many things, not just elves and dwarves, dragons and fairies, but also water and bread, moon and sun, and ourselves, mortal man, when we are enchanted. That
Mm.
idea that it's not just an outward thing. It's not just that. And this was in my investigations into wonder.
Mhm.
One of the first things I came upon was that wonder is not about the things that happen to you. It's not that there's certain things that are wondrous and certain things that aren't. Like, a dragon
Mhm.
is wondrous, but a dog isn't.
Mhm.
Wonder is a kind of openness to how you perceive something.
Mm.
And it's a certain way of opening oneself to the world. And
Mhm.
when you do that, it's actually something in you that changes, not in the world that changes. The
Mm.
only difference between a fantastical world and Earth as it is to us is that we are used to this. And so we've
Right.
developed this crust, this filter over the wonder and amazement that is inviting us in at every moment. But we
Mhm.
keep thinking we keep getting externally motivated towards wonder. Like, we need more
Mhm.
things, but it's just,
Mhm.
a matter of what rather our judgments and how we can
Hmm.
open those up, crack those open a little bit, unlock that door, see
Mm.
things in a new way. So,
Right. Yeah, that's great. I think of wonder as a combination of curiosity and awe, I think.
mm,
And I grew up reading tons of books, reading a lot of fiction, and I think that one of the biggest attractions I had to that was this sense of wonder. And yeah, I think that the part of the spiritual journey and goal is to find that wonder in everything,
hmm.
whether it's amazing spiritual experiences or everyday life. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I'm always trying to feel more wonder, always trying to challenge that. It's so easy to think that things have to be flat, have to be boring,
Hmm.
have to be just what they are. There's a lot of reductionistic outlooks that seem to want us to flatten the world into just one kind of thing.
Hmm.
Matter, machine, stuff,
Hmm.
this goopy nothingness, right? It doesn't, and the difference between things all dissolves when we see the world
Hmm.
that way. But
Hmm.
that, I think, something I feel very strongly is that even though that sort of cold-headed rationalism presents itself as a perspective that avoids projection, like that's, it's just sort of, I don't care what the world is, I am not trying to put my own view of what it is onto it.
Hmm.
I am just seeing it as it is, and it just turns out it's not interesting, right?
Hmm.
Like that seems to be the perspective, right? And I don't mean, this is not at all a diss to all rationalists or people who focus on the mechanism of the world, or focus on the the world as a machine, the way in which it's like a machine, because many of those people, the actual scientists who are going out and investigating how stuff works, are some of the most deeply enchanted people. Rachel
Hmm.
Carson wrote a lot about the enchantment in doing science and observation, but it's more so the public consciousness perception of the world that is just machine,
Hmm.
just a bunch of stuff banging around.
Hmm.
And again, there's that idea that that's not projection, that that's just a sort of objective look at how things are. But I think it is projection. It's a uh, Stephen Howard Buhner, I think, is the one who originally put it this way, that everyone's so afraid of anthropomorphizing, but why aren't we afraid of mechanomorphizing? That a machine is just as much a human creation as humans are biological beings. And
Hmm.
when we say the universe is just a machine, that's as much a projection of a metaphor or an image as saying that it's all alive, or it's
Right.
all
Right.
like
Yeah.
it comes from a certain attitude towards things that
Hmm.
there are reason to think is just as untenable in some way as, or
Right.
falls short of the real picture as much as a kind of delusional over enchantment might too. Like it's like,
Hmm.
believing that in everything, right? Could, yeah, but
Yeah. It makes me think of conversations I've had with people about this idea of we live in a matrix, we live in a
mm.
simulation or whatever. And I think they were very put off against that. And I get it because it is kind of this mechanical computer way to think about it, but it's like, well, we got the idea about computers and stuff like that from nature. Like everything is related, is connected, and so um that it's not so black and white, like nature versus computers and mechanical. So yeah, it's just kind of funny.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I This is a good segue, but I want to go back real quick and ask you about kind of your religious or spiritual or non-religious spiritual upbringing and
Mm.
how that plays into your beliefs or coming to ecology. Yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up as an only child in the woods, pretty isolated, with two parents who are um old hippies.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, she worked at the Bronx Zoo for 19 years before she had me, and then I was just another of the exotic animals she spent her life hand raising.
I've been to the
I think
Bronx
I
Zoo. It was really nice.
Oh, it is nice.
Mm.
It's a good zoo,
Mhm.
yeah. And so I think in middle school I counted the amount of pets or animals that we had around the house, and I counted somewhere in the 60s or 70s.
Oh wow.
So we had fish, we had chickens, we had ferrets, we had an Australian sugar glider, we had a couple of parrots, we had cats, we had dogs, we had horses, we had, I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch. My mom
Hmm.
would come to my elementary school classrooms like one day out of every year and give a demonstration to all the kids of all of these different animals that she'd borrow
Uh-huh.
from her friends at the zoo. Like she'd show all the kids Madagascar hissing
Oh man.
cockroaches and snakes and everything. So my love of nature is very much influenced by her. And I grew up
Hmm.
surrounded by the woods, and I'd go off alone and be in the woods a lot. Um, and and my dad, meanwhile, is a very he has a little bit of that spark behind the eyes that the Taoist sages probably do, where he just is
Mm.
comfortable dancing in these
Hmm.
paradoxes and will just say
Hmm.
something wise out of nowhere. And so
Yeah.
my
I was thinking
interest in
about Taoism
mysticism and
today.
yeah,
I was like that Taoism really connects with nature as well. So yeah.
yeah, and he's a wizard. Like when I
Mm.
was younger, he would always my parents would always encourage my imagination too. So
Mm.
I remember my dad taking a walking stick of his that looks like a gnarled staff and just being like, hey, watch this, and just pointing at the fire, and the flames would surge, and then he'd just walk away and say nothing. And I'm sure, I don't know if he threw something in there or if he
Uh-huh.
was, but he was just very playful.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I grew up in this environment. And yeah, I'm also excited to talk about Taoism. I've been reading Chuang Tzu and Lao Tzu quite a bit. Ursula K. Le Guin's translation of the Tao Te Ching is something I've been getting really
Mm. Yeah, I
into.
want to get into
Love
that
Ursula.
some point. I heard
Yeah.
it's great.
So uh yeah, favorite quote of hers. This is a tangent from the personal
Hmm.
question thing,
Sure.
but one of my favorite quotes of all time is an Ursula K. Le Guin quote. She said, "Those who don't believe in dragons are often eaten by dragons from
Mm.
within."
Yeah.
One of my
Yeah, I've
favorites.
heard of that. That kind of goes with Young talking about the need to explore unconscious and the dark side and everything like that, or
Yeah,
be overtaken by it. Yeah, it's good
yeah.
stuff.
Uh, a Jung quote I really like in that regard is, "Repression is as much a cure for the problems that the shadow brings as beheading is a cure for the headache." You need
Oh.
to you need to see this all as
Mhm.
a part of you.
Right.
You
I
need
love
to let
that.
it
That's
you need
great.
to really grapple with all this. You need to go
Hmm.
into those depths. You need to plunge into the ocean. You need to spelunk in those caves of the unconscious, of the imagery, of the deep imagination, or else you're not ever going to live your full life. You're not going
Hmm.
to commit to the fullness of life. You're not going to say yes to the serpent, as Joseph Campbell has framed it.
Mm.
But
Hmm.
uh so when I was younger, yeah, I would go off into the woods alone a lot. And I mean, my parents, I think, understand me a lot more than I thought they did then when I was a kid.
Hmm.
But I was definitely one of those only children being like, nobody understands me. I'm so deep.
I
And
felt the same way,
I,
and I wasn't an only child, so.
oh, great. Yeah. Yeah. So the experience and some of
Hmm.
the embarrassment of it. So yeah, I would go off alone though, and really feel connected to the woods in a way that was always so special to me. And not only was I would wander off, I'd be singing, I'd be dancing, I'd be just praying or moving and not really have any rational basis for it, not have any set of beliefs or set
Hmm.
of or tradition or anything that any of this was coming out of. I just had images that resonated with me. I was very much dancing in the deep unconscious. Like that
Hmm.
was what was coming through me. And I
Mm.
I believe that the unconscious is not a personal unconscious or even a collective human unconscious, the way that Jung
Mm.
started to explore it later in his life, but a world unconscious, an imagination of the earth that surges through each of us. That is my interpretation of the Tao, is this imagination of being that wants to express itself spontaneously through you in some certain way, and following that river
Mm.
is how you get there. And
Right.
so I was very comfortable in that space as a child, and especially when it came to imaginary play. And I would often bring friends into my imaginary worlds, into the woods, and be like, this is what we're going to be. This is where we're going. And I think that most kids fairly quickly transition from my dolls are alive and my imaginary friends are real to
Mm-hmm.
let's play a game and pretend those things are real.
Mm.
And I transitioned out of that phase much, much later than I think most
Mm-hmm.
kids did. And so I was that kid in middle school who was saying, no, I actually go to other worlds in the woods, and you
Mm-hmm.
should believe that I'm telling the truth.
Uh-huh.
Then I will bring you there, and you will see that we're in another place. We're
Mm-hmm.
in another dimension. And that thing over there that looked like a flash of darkness against the hill slightly, that's actually a monster, and it is
Mm-hmm.
coming after us. And this is not pretend. This is not
Mm-hmm.
a game we're playing. And I still feel that way.
Do you feel like that was a good thing or bad thing?
So what I think was happening was that my younger self was picking up on a deep intuitive truth that I didn't have the language to communicate to others. And that
Mm-hmm.
truth was that what some people call the imagination and dismiss as mere fiction, as
Mm-hmm.
less real than the physical, immediate world. Or I shouldn't say immediate, the imagination can be very immediate, but the physical, the surfaces of things,
Right.
right? The
Right.
world of things among things.
Mm-hmm.
People speak of the imagination as a projected, very uh sub
It's something
subjective,
we come up with instead of it being inside of us that we're discovering that's already there. Is that
mm. Yes, but I wouldn't even say inside of us, because I
okay?
think it's found in collaboration. It's an interstitial thing. It's a
Mm-hmm.
mind that there's this woman, I believe her name is Edith Cobb. I think she's a developmental psychologist
Mm-hmm. I've heard of
who
her.
wrote a book, Edith Cobb or it's Edith something.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's similar people with similar last names. There's an
Mm-hmm.
anthropologist with a similar name, but so I'm not sure if I'm going to get the name right, but she wrote a book or an article that was about the child playing in the woods as fulfilling an ecological niche,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a kind of openness or movement with the things of the world, picking up each thing, picking up a stick, moving things here, saying hi to a mushroom, sprinkling leaves on a tree, doing like just playing in that space that moves things around in the ecosystem, and speaking phenomenologically of that as a kind of ecological service, or a sort of participation in something larger than oneself, a
Mm-hmm.
psychological immersion into a larger mind, into what
Mm-hmm.
Aldous Huxley calls big mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the intuition, put simply, that I think I had as a kid was that the imagination is real. The
Mm-hmm.
imagination is not fake.
Right.
And our cultural model of reality essentially allows for an objective world we can all share that is not in any way imaginary, and a subjective world where things like myths, stories, imagination lives. And so it's very personal. It's like, I can imagine those things. Maybe they have meaning to me. And even
Mm-hmm.
some people, when they talk, even I don't think Jung, but some of the ways that Jung is interpreted is even taken this way, where it's like, it matters to you, but not to me, what you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing in your dreams, or in your
Mm-hmm.
imaginary worlds, or in
Mm-hmm.
your fantasies. It matters to you, but not to me. And I very strongly had this intuition that it matters to everybody that there's a dragon on that mountain.
Mm-hmm.
It matters to everybody.
Mm.
And there's some way in which there is a truth to that. And I
Right.
didn't have the way to frame that as a kid. And so the
Mm-hmm.
way it came out was, no, it's literally real. We are
Mm-hmm.
going to another world.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to a more nuanced understanding of it now, but
Right.
that was where I think it came from. So in some sense, yes, Arrested Development for sure. Not as
Uh-huh.
socialized as some of the other
Uh-huh.
two, being like, no, my
Mm-hmm.
imaginary worlds are real, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was tapping into something that I deeply felt to be, and still deeply feel to be, true.
Right. Yeah. I think going back to Campbell, you mentioned,
Mm.
I first read him in college as well. And um, he goes into collective symbols. And I think
Hmm.
that that's what fiction is all about, finding these connections between us all, and
Hmm.
that they are true inside of us, and together we that's how we connect, as we find these connections, these similarities, and it is very important. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's how we connect, and it's how the world itself connects with us. I think
Mm,
one of the reasons I try to flip the script on the interiority of these images, thinking it's like it's what brings human minds together, or it's symbols that human minds all share, is that the weight of those symbols. I mean, those symbols are in images.
hmm
Let's just to take a simple example. Let's say the idea of a jagged rock as a symbol for harshness or
hmm
aggression. Like if you imagine a character who is uh, covered in jagged armor, jagged stone, that's you get a archetypal sense of this kind of aggressiveness, this pain, and probably someone who's sharp, who's uh, brutal, but we need sharp rocks for sharp words to even make sense as a metaphor.
mm.
And so it's the world outside of us that we're in collaboration with to create these symbols.
Ah, that's
It's not
good.
human
Yeah.
beings that invent symbols at one point and
hmm
then kind of plop them like a virus into the minds of everyone else. It's not, I
hmm
mean, I I understand yeah, I guess I think this is one of the reasons that Richard Dawkins has such a hard time understanding spirituality, is because his book on memes is based on this notion that ideas, spiritual notions, symbols, all these things are like infectious memes that just move from one person to another by human interaction. But
mm.
I think it's something behind that. There's a world behind that. There's a world
hmm
of moving images that
Right.
is not human.
hmm
That
hmm
is the non-human world.
hmm hmm
There's a wonderful interpretation of dragons and why we have such a why dragons appear and reappear all over the world, in like every culture's
Oh,
mythology
right,
there's a
right.
dragon.
hmm
And it's a combination of three predators that our early primate ancestors would have had to deal with: the
hmm
snake, the eagle, and the big cat. And if you think of dragons, they're always cat-like.
mm
And they're scaled like a snake, and they have breath weapons in D&D terms, right?
hmm
Like
hmm
a serpent's bite. Uh and they fly. And so they're all of these, but they are all of that. And
hmm
they are a force in and of themselves that points to so many other symbols, that's
hmm
transparent with their own meaning. Uh Fritjof Schwann, who is a scholar of religion, has a really dense and weird little article called The Symbolic Mind. And he talks about how we tend to think that metaphorical meaning is imposed onto things, that someone who thinks metaphorically is saying, I'm going to draw a link, build a bridge between these two ideas. Like, for instance, um, a good example is a stop sign. There's a stop sign and it tells you to stop. So there's this hexagon that's red and it's telling you to stop moving. And so those ideas of stopping moving and the hexagon that's red are just, there's a bridge built between them. There's nothing that
mm
the red hexagon immediately says about stopping. We
Right.
have to construct that meaning.
Uh-huh.
But a symbol is different. A symbol, the reason water means flow, and when you're in flow, you're like water, is not because we've created that connection,
hmm
but because the two share a real sympathetic resonance in the
Right.
world outside of human
hmm
association.
hmm
And so,
You're
yeah,
you're basically talking about like ontology, and like there's this ground of truth beneath the surface of things.
absolutely. Yeah, I my favorite thing to say is that the other world is this world. I feel like I say it over and over and sound like a broken record. And I think the other world, the world of myth, the world of symbol, the world of metaphor, is a dimension of depth of our world. It's the in-between of our world. It's the inside of our world. The hunter in Celtic mythology who sees a white stag and runs off and then crawls into a fox burrow and crawls out the other side in a very unfamiliar place has come to exactly the same place where he started. But everything is lit up with this vibrancy and newness because he's seeing the resonances of things between things, the world between the worlds, not beyond the world, not another world, not a different world, but this world as it is rightly seen when we open ourselves to the wonder of many things becoming other things, of unfolding into their own metaphors. Like when I was a kid and picked up a stick in the forest, that stick became a sword because it was straight and long and made a whooshing sound. Those are traits of the stick. It unfolded into its own metaphors through the relationship that I had with it. But that sword is in the stick.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's great. So, this is great. Continue with your story of growing up. So, did you have a particular religion, anything like that your parents taught you, or you just kind of?
No, as far as religion, my mom was raised Irish Catholic until her father said, fuck the church because they were asking for too much money. And so she never really grew up with much religion. My dad was raised culturally Jewish. And so I grew up with the typical American Jewish, like the menorah next to the Christmas tree, but no real religion.
Right.
I did go to Buddhist Sunday school when I was 6. And I remember one particular meditation lesson where we were asked to close our eyes and see in the sparks behind the blacks of our eyelids many possible universes and go into each one of those universes and see what that might be like. And I feel like that was a good spark of my early childhood imagination. And yeah, so I was raised in that very loose way. As I got older, and I never lost my spiritual connection to nature, but as I got older, I sort of became split down the middle, where I became very interested in philosophy and very interested in the way that people were manipulating people with religion and with fundamentalism and the way that cults worked and the way that, and so I became a very loud atheist in high school and early college, while at the same time having a very profound personal spiritual relationship with the more than human world that I couldn't frame, that had a very, it came from a very non-rational place. It wasn't grounded in, it was just like, this is something in me I can't control. It's there. And it's honestly what I care about more than anything. It's like the center in me. It's the small green glowing stone at the core of my soul. But also religion is bullshit and spirituality is bullshit and all this. So it's like this very weird space within myself, this cognitive dissonance that I was only able to really find the roots of connection to when I became exposed to animism and to the foundations of a more nuanced
You found that there was structures, there was belief systems that incorporated what you believed in, but still had some rationality and some formation, some map making.
Yeah, or even got to the kinds of truths that are behind the split between metaphor and literal truth,
right?
That are something below or beneath. And this is what I think all of the mystics of every religious tradition are getting at. Like every parable in Chuang-Tzu begins with a normal conversation and descends into just language as gibbering inanity, is how Burton Watson puts it, where it just, you cannot describe the things that are indescribable, but they're still there. Like, there's nothing more spiritual than the miracle of the fact that there is something. but there
Mm-hmm.
is a reality. And it's like, you can't, the people who, and I think I was sort of led into this feeling when I was younger of we have reality figured out. Uh, and all of those intuitions that there's something deeper are just human foible. And then at a certain point, I just saw through that. I just was like, that's a skein over
Mm-hmm.
something that just
That's to assuage our fear of
indescribably,
the
yeah.
unknown, or
Mhm.
you know, yeah.
There's a difference between the unknown and the unknowable, I think, is what
Mm,
I like. The real mystery is in the unknowable,
mm-hmm.
is in that raw, unconditioned reality, that flow of being, that life itself, that miracle of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that all of our boxes, all of our containers that we try to put the world in, all of our labels, all of our Solomon seals to contain the threatening, demonic to, chaos of reality,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense of just Solomon trying to trap demons. Not that I think anything in the expressive real is actually demonic, but we try to contain it. We try to trap it in
Mm-hmm.
concepts and saying, oh, I know what a tree is. Do you know what a tree is? Have you looked at a tree? Have you seen, I mean, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know
Yeah.
if that
No.
says,
Yeah.
Siddhartha says, in Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, like, wisdom, whenever somebody tries to speak wisdom, it sounds like foolishness. And I feel like that every time I'm trying to teach about mysticism, I feel like I am not making sense. This
Right.
this is never going to make sense.
Right. How I say it basically is that mystics were not tied to the ideas and belief systems, but tied to the experience of God or
Mm-hmm.
the transcendent, whatever you want to call it. And so in that experience, they realize that it is beyond expression. So any words or um, you know belief systems, theology, whatever we put behind that, it's never going to match up, it's never going to measure up, it's never going to be able to describe or totally understand. So we don't have to be so tied to these things, we don't have to get dogmatic or fundamental and fight against each other about who has the best symbology of something
Mm.
inexpressible.
There's a Buddhist parable, don't mistake the moon for the finger pointing to the moon.
Right.
I also like how Paul Tillich, the Protestant theologian,
Mhm.
says it, God is a symbol for God.
I
That's
love
one of my
that.
favorites. Yeah.
Well, Master Eckhart says, I pray God rid me of God.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, yeah. I mean, it's right. It is the experience, because ultimately, and this is what got me interested in phenomenology, was realizing that the world of experience is the first and only actual world. And even the world of fact, Thoreau said, if I ever meet a fact, it would cut me through the middle. Like, you can't actually, it would slice me in two or something. He
Uh-huh.
said it would be so sharp as a sword or something like
Uh-huh.
that. Like but this idea that we think that there is, uh, we think that the things that are most true, I guess I'll put it that way, are facts,
Hmm.
are ideas about the world.
Hmm.
Things that are the way that they are in a certain, like that apples are apples, trees are trees. 2 + 2 = 4.
Hmm.
But these are concepts that we encounter from an indescribable, ineffable, qualitative, conscious experience. So even the most rigorous scientific data is collected by experiencing beings, read by experiencing beings, and interpreted by experiencing beings. And the data as itself, as untainted by the subjective and um the ambiguous and the indescribable, doesn't exist. It's not just that bias will always sneak its way into everything. It's that bias, if we want to use the word bias, is the fundamental nature of existence. Like, it's like,
Right.
I mean, it's not peripheral, right?
Hmm.
It's not like, oh, this might be slightly affected by who I am or my experience. It's anything objective I encounter is subjectively encountered objectivity. So it's not, we have this illusion, and I think this is the illusion we're under in the philosophy of rationalism, is
Mhm.
that we can occupy some God's eye perspective on the world, but
Yeah.
we can't. We're
Mhm.
always in the world. All of our
Right.
imaginings of looking at things objectively are imaginings of doing so. They're
Mhm.
made up of sensations, images, sounds, smells, and tastes. They're they're not they're not made up of truths. They're not made up of
Mhm.
ideas. There's no such thing as an idea. There's
Yeah.
such thing as images that come through in a slightly more ephemeral or intangible way, as the sort that I can touch or show to you. But those are images. Those are not
Mhm.
ideas. There's no such
Mhm.
thing. There's no such
Yeah.
thing as a thought.
Mhm. Yeah. That's great. It was great. Um, so so you were an atheist and then you came to a more nuanced or better perspective. And then you got your degrees. Is that kind of how it happened?
I guess so. Yeah. I hesitate to say was an atheist, or I mean, I don't, it's hard for me to put any labels on
Mm-hmm.
myself in terms of beliefs. And when
Right.
people ask me about what I believe, I always hem and haw about it and don't give a straight answer and talk about
Uh-huh.
symbols instead. Because,
Uh-huh.
and actually, it's the same answer, um, when it, as the whole qualitative experience thing, ineffable, you is that beliefs are concepts. Beliefs are, what kind of claim do you want to make about objective reality? And all I can say is I have my experience, and I Carl Jung, I think, said, I don't believe in God, I know God.
Mm-hmm.
And people
Right.
could interpret that as, oh, he's so certain. But
Right.
no, he's not saying he might say, I don't believe in God, I just know
Mm-hmm.
God. Like God doesn't exist, but I've also met God, that kind of. And that's when the mystics start to talk in a
Uh,
way that many
a
people think
Buddhist
sounds like
koan.
nonsense. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's accurate. I mean, that's I think all we can do is play in that paradox.
Mm-hmm.
And so the real magic for me is found in experience and in
Mm-hmm.
states of consciousness, and ways of experiencing the world, ways of opening
Mm-hmm.
ourselves up to different experiences of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to call myself anything that could be interpreted as a belief, it would be an animist. But my friend David Abram, who wrote The Spell of the Sensuous, makes the really important point that animism is not actually a belief system to those who, not in the same way that we tend to think of it as,
Mm-hmm.
to those who practice it, like Christian
Sorry.
missionaries. Oh, sorry.
Define. You could just define animism real quick for.
So animism, and this is kind of the trouble, is that animism
Right.
has been just defined by anthropologists influenced by Christian missionaries who would go into indigenous societies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as the belief of spirits in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So the belief that there's a spirit in the river, there's a spirit in the mountain, there's a spirit in the tree, there's a spirit in the rock. And animism was defined this way by, well, actually, funny enough, the definition of animism in the dictionary, uh, Josh Schrei points this out in an episode of The Emeralds called Animism is Normative Consciousness. And if you haven't heard of that podcast, it's a good one. Josh does a really, really good job crafting this space of experience for his thinking. In that episode, he points out that the dictionary definition of animism is the attribution of a soul to inanimate objects, which is a definition of a
Mm.
word that already points out that the word isn't, that the thing is an error. So it's like animism has no chance to prove itself as
Mm-hmm.
true if the definition of it is that those things are already inanimate. But getting
Right.
back
Right.
to yeah, so it's just kind of an irony there,
Mm-hmm.
like with our
Paradox.
yeah. So anyway, getting back to the misinterpretations, the missionaries coming in to indigenous cultures assumed that they were seeing cults revolving around a spiritual world of beings that inhabited natural things. Because from the Christian perspective, there is the earthly plane, and then there
Mm-hmm.
is the spiritual world. And
Right.
spirit and matter are two distinct substances.
Uh-huh.
They're two distinct universes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Dualists.
it's very dualistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have souls, but we're not our souls. And
Mm-hmm.
And so they naturally interpreted the discussion of an intelligence and awareness of the more than human world and ways of speaking about that world that portray trees, rivers,
Mm-hmm.
stories, dreams, words, mountains, clouds, fire as persons instead of objects, as
Mm.
believing that there must be, oh, well, the fire is just a fire, but maybe they mean that there's a person inside the fire, right? It's just like, no, because that's the only way you could conceptualize it within
Right.
a dualistic
Uh-huh.
metaphysics.
Uh-huh.
So this
So
is
is
influenced.
animism, is that, could you say that's parallel to like pantheism?
It is parallel to pantheism. The difference is that pantheism, and I think this is also where like you could find a pantheistic animist and animistic
Mm-hmm.
pantheist. So it's not a clean distinction whatsoever. But pantheism, the fundamental assumption is that God is the universe.
Right.
So it kind of creates a oneness of
Mm-hmm.
creation, like everything's an expression of the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Animism emphasizes the particularity and otherness and alterity of all the forms of creation. So
Mm.
everything it doesn't make a statement necessarily about the universe. Animism is
Mm.
more concerned with the locality of your own experience and the beings you encounter there. So
Mm.
the river by your village, what kind of person is it? What kind of personality is it? What sort of things does it like? What sort of words does it like to hear? What can it offer to you? What can it do to you? What can it do for you?
Mm.
And so it's more of a particular relational development
Mm.
than something that's like pantheism is often framed as a kind of uh as a theology,
Mm-hmm.
as a way of understanding the cosmos.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Mm.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
But the two can totally
Right.
overlap.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mary Jane Rubenstein wrote a great book called Pantheologies, which I'm still making my way through, but which is a fantastic look at how pantheism throughout most of history has only been attacked. Like it's actually so hard to find any like nowadays people talk about pantheism positively,
Mm-hmm.
but if you look to where people were coining that term and talking about that term in Western history, it's like everybody's just saying, well, at least I'm not a pantheist. At least I'm not a dirty pantheist.
Uh-huh.
And Spinoza getting accused aggressively of being a pantheist,
All right.
saying
Uh-huh.
God is nature. It's
Mm-hmm.
just yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm a little coming from a Christian tradition. I'm a little
Mm.
more comfortable with panentheism,
Mm.
saying God is within all things, but He's also beyond all things. He is the ground of all
Yeah.
being. So,
God is at
but
least the universe.
right, so yeah, so I don't know, but the more I go along, I'm not sure I see the clear distinctions between pantheism and panentheism. So
Mm.
it's it's interesting. Um, so. One question, how has modern society become so disconnected from nature?
Ooh, that is a heavy question. That is a so many layered question.
Right, right.
Oh, what angle to come at that with?
You did mention integral studies, and I'm a big fan of spiral dynamics. I don't
Of
know if
what?
you spiral dynamics. Okay.
I don't know what that is.
All right, don't worry about it.
I'm interested.
Come at it from your angle.
I all right. So I think one one way to perhaps oh man, this is I feel like I'm having one of those
Do you want me
experiences
to
of
go first?
having 100 thoughts at the same time, and I
Uh,
need to find the narrow
right.
approach. So
I get that.
yeah, if you want to ask a more
Okay.
specific part of that, or
Or do you
give
want me
your
to
own
give you
perspective, yes,
you want me to
please.
answer my question and then you go off of that?
Beautiful.
Okay. You're the interviewer now and I'm the we switch places.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I mean from a spiral dynamics perspective, stages of consciousness, a psychological or sociological understanding or look at history um of humanity. Um there was kind of this kind of what we've been talking about, the animism, pantheism, indigenous tribes and how
Hmm.
they kind of view the world. And then there was this kind of power, Genghis Khan, kind of this clans becoming together and
Mm.
and then it got into like Middle Ages, and then there was society formed, and there was institutions, church, and then we get into the Enlightenment period, and that's when, oh hey, we have rationalism, we have logic, we are beginning to separate science and spirituality, and beginning to separate religion from science. And I think that that's kind of the start of, where you can really see maybe the start of disconnect from nature and science, and especially like the Western world, we're like, oh, science is the measurement of the physical, and we lose
Mm,
that deeper layer that we've been talking about, and it's all about um, the differences between things rather than the connection between all things.
mm.
And like you said, that rationalism um and scientific materialism. So that's just a few thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good thoughts there. I mean, it definitely is something that happened in stages, right?
Hmm.
Where there was more of a connection, more of a sense of a dynamic of relationality and equal interchange between the human and more than human worlds, and then that became, so we became more focused on the human. Um,
Hmm.
Over long periods of time, whether that's, as you said, into clans, into cities, into more organized religious structures that viewed humans as having a special or privileged place in creation, like the
Hmm.
development of the Scala Natura in medieval Christian education, where you have God, angels, man,
Mm.
woman, beast.
Hierarchy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the hierarchy. We create this
Hmm.
ladder. And then the Enlightenment just cuts off the top couple rungs of that ladder, but keeps the structure in place. So you
Mm.
just got man at the top as God,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
As that's where we get the illusion that we have this God's eye perspective, is we've educated
Mm.
ourselves to believe that we are in that that position, uh that we have the ability to exert that sort of control, when really
Hmm.
we're just one part of a world, not
Hmm.
not the whole world. And I think I am inclined to locate the origin of the disconnect probably with agriculture and static settlement
Mm.
and the development of the first walled cities.
Yeah, I
Because
was about to say, sorry, interrupting, but just like
no.
the as we discover things, inventions, it's like, oh, we have power over nature, and then also now we have cities and buildings and stuff, and so we're not within nature,
Mhm.
the wild outside as much, so it's a natural kind of disconnect from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what you where you are, it only comes back to experience. It's like where
Hmm.
you are is what is the world that you see. If you live
Right.
your life behind walls, you're going to see what's outside those walls as separate from you. If
Hmm.
you live your life out in the world, out in nature, out in a forest, you're not going to see the forest as separate from you, but it's
Hmm.
about what you experience. And there's a great uh there's a great article on this in the kind of the psychological effects that cities have, called Nature and Madness. Or no, that's Paul Shepard. That's a different. That's also a wonderful, interesting article. He's a philosopher, but there's another one in a that I'm forgetting the author of, but that talks about the psychological effects of being in cities and how that must have caused a
Mm.
split in consciousness for early humans.
Mm.
And we can see the radical different the radically different attitudes towards agriculture and what agriculture means in our relationship to nature, when we look at how agriculture has been received by colonized peoples when colonizers bring it over. So there's the Native American Smohala, who when when asked to teach farming and for his people to adopt farming, um, said, you asked me to take a knife to my mother's breast. You asked me to cut into her flesh.
Hmm.
And at some point, a little over 10,000, 11,000 years ago, human beings decided that that was an appropriate thing to do. And there's lots of evidence to show that there wasn't a technological change that where people were like, oh, we can do this now, so let's do it. Let's make farms,
Mm.
let's make agriculture. It
Mhm.
was always a possibility. It was something that a lot of cultures have integrated very slightly throughout history long before then, or prehistory, I guess, long before then. But the change was some possibly some catastrophe that led people to think that they needed to do this to survive, that they needed to
Mhm.
take care of themselves to survive because they'd been betrayed by the natural
Mhm.
world. And one of the reasons
Mm.
I think that this is true, the sense of resentment and betrayal and anger that we have towards nature that's manifesting in
Mm.
our destruction of it and still is a wound that's affecting us to this day, is in the way that if you look at myths, if you look at the Enuma Elish, the creation myth of the Babylonians,
Mm.
you have a creation myth that is in some ways, in a lot of ways, similar to a lot of indigenous creation myths that posit a sky and an earth god and goddess, or a like certain primordial gods that create human beings and create the world as it is. But in the Enuma Elish, there's a second step, and it's very similar to the second step that happens in Greek mythology with the Titans in another similarly agricultural society, uh, which is Tiamat. So I'll briefly kind of
Mhm.
tell the myth. So there's two gods. There's Apsu and Tiamat, sweet water and briny water. Apsu is the void. Apsu is the sweet water, the empty water, the emptiness, the nothingness.
Mhm.
Tiamat is creation. She's life, the briny water,
Mm.
right? Where algae can
Mhm.
grow. She's the mother of all things. She gives birth. The two of them, as the primordial parents, give birth to creation, give birth to the 10,000 things, as the Taoists would say. And Apsu, the void, at one point decides that he can't sleep. Void wants to be in void, right? I mean, void wants the annihilation of all things, void wants
Mhm.
stillness. And so he says to Tiamat, I can't sleep with all these gods you've made. We should kill them. And Tiamat says, I'm not going to murder my children, and steps
Mhm.
back. She retreats. So that would have been the end of it, except one of Apsu's advisors says, "Oh, you should do it anyway, even though she doesn't want to." And one of the godlings, hears this and instead kills Apsu and makes from his body the heavens.
Mm.
And this is exactly like how Zeus
Mhm.
killed Cronus in the Greek myths, and then Zeus became king of the gods. And this was I think I think Enlil, or El, is the god that did this in the Enuma Elish. But that creates a revolution. That creates a revolution. The gods are in control. Tiamat hears about this, and she's often portrayed as a serpent, as a dragon. And dragons often represent the earth, often represent the world of life. She creates uh, an army of demons to attack and get revenge for the killing of her husband Apsu. And so Marduk, the one of the godlings, El's son,
Mhm.
and I hope I'm getting it right. I think it's El, and I know it's Marduk. Uh, Marduk, this masculine hero, goes out fully armed with powerful weapons and supernatural abilities, and cuts through Tiamat's army of demons and slays his grandmother, Tiamat. And from her body, from her tears, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow. And from her body, he makes the earth. And then from her commander, he sacrifices her first commander to make humankind to serve the gods. And his seat is in the central temple in Babylon, in a Babylon of the gods, above or beyond or behind Babylon. And then the city of Babylon becomes a way of honoring the triumph of the warlike masculine cohort of child gods over nature.
Mm.
And I think this is a mythological retelling of what it means to build a walled city. And something in that myth, the betrayal of Tiamat, makes me think there must have been something to make people feel like, even though all our lives got shorter and worse and diseased after we settled and developed agrarian
Mm-hmm.
communities, this was all we could do to survive. And I can't help but think that that resentment sticks with us. And the
Mm.
interpretations of the dragon, I mean, of life in China, that split never happened in the same way. And so you have the dragons as rivers, the dragons as the water cycle, the dragons
Mm.
as eternity, the dragons as the flow of the Tao. You don't have that mother betraying her children and them
Mm.
resentfully having power over her for the rest of history in the same way
Mm.
you do in the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really interesting. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's I don't know what to I don't know what to say. That's
Mm,
just interesting. I'll have to think about that. That's really, really cool. I do know, from my own upbringing,
mm,
Christianity, in the Christian, in Genesis, talking about God creating the earth and creating Adam and Eve, the first two humans, and telling them to have dominion over
mm,
nature and to rule it, and then because Eve ate the apple, sin came in the world, and
mm,
kind of like you're talking about this distrust, this unsafety,
mhm,
and that now man has to till the earth and he has to work hard and he has to sweat, and women have to birth child and have that
mm,
pain and stuff like that. So um, that now there's this work and this strife, and uh, and we have to dominate the earth, and we can't, and now the snake tempted Eve to eat the apple. Now
mm,
animals, we can't trust them. They might be dangerous as well. So um
mm,
this is interesting, the parallels there. And so I think we can agree, and we're understanding that we're all within this ecological system to uh on one of my other podcasts I talk about evolution and how there's this idea of survival of the fittest, but in this global perspective, survival is, hey, I survive because we're in relationship, because we're all in this
mm,
together. So your survival is my survival. So let's not think of it as, hey, we need to dominate the earth, we need to subdue it, we need to, yeah, rule over it. Let's protect it. Let's work in collaboration. Let's see ourselves as within this ecological system that um, we need to protect and help so that it will survive and we'll survive. We're all in this
mm.
together.
I love all of that. And a note on Genesis and on the command of
Hmm.
dominion and on the God of Genesis as a whole. So eh, the the Hebrews were in captivity in Babylon before the writing down of the Old Testament of the
Right.
Tanakh.
Hmm.
And uh, after after escaping Babylon, after going into exile, um, the the old sages, and this is an old professor of mine's interpretation of this, looked up at the seven visible celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the five visible planets. And for the Babylonians, those were seven gods that all had contributed to creation in some way. And so these old scribes said, our God, our God can do everything those seven gods can do, but
Hmm.
he does what each one does for one day, and he even takes a break. and um and but the influence, I guess the important part though is the influence of Babylon here. Marduk has a lot of parallels to the God of Genesis
Hmm.
as a king god,
Mm.
as a god that commands, that controls, and in one way, a god that speaks the world into being, that creates through command, that creates as Lord, is like the Enuma Elish in this narrative of a creation and separation, and of a we're protected behind these walls.
Mm.
It just cuts out the prologue. It's like without the background of there was this revolution, there was this state before there was this separation. And so it begins with this separation. And another thing is, have you read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Incredible book. I would really highly recommend it. She is a Potawatomi ethnobotanist and poet, and she has in the first chapter she tells the story of her people, which is Sky Woman falling. It's an Anishinaabe creation myth, and Sky Woman, the first human, falls from the sky world pregnant, and the geese fly and catch her as she falls. And Turtle is there waiting and says, "Stand on my back, and we'll go down and get earth for you to live in." Because there's just water right now. There's just water. And animals go down and grab things and try to grab things from the bottom of the ocean, but they don't make it back up in time. They all come back out of breath, unable to reach the ground. And finally, Muskrat dives down and comes up dead, but in his fist is clutched a little clump of dirt. And that from that dirt, from that mud that Muskrat sacrificed himself for, Sky Woman dances on the back of the turtle and creates Turtle Island, which is North America.
Mm.
And she had brought with her a bundle of seeds, which she spread on the ground and created all of the plants, all of the medicinal herbs and plants and the green world. And the animals all collaborate in creation with Sky Woman. Humans are necessary, but so is everything else. And humans are necessary as the youngest children of creation, as the youngest siblings that have a lot to learn but can do their part.
Mm-hmm.
But we're part of that whole system. It's all a network. And she draws the direct parallel between, or the contrast, I should say, between Sky Woman falling and the story of Adam and Eve, when she imagines the colonization of North America by Europe as the meeting of these two women. And she imagines the world that Eve lives in and the world that Sky Woman lives in. In one case, in the former case, a fallen world where we must be in competition, just as you said, with everything. We have to defeat the world. We have to come up on top. And Sky Woman never having left the garden, right? Never having gone anywhere else. And I like the line she uses when she imagines their dialogue for Sky Woman. She says, she imagines Sky Woman saying to Eve, "Sister, you really got the short end of the stick. like you've been traumatized. Like what's, yeah."
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about, nature and the world, safe or unsafe. And I mean, you do see within nature, like animals, they eat each other. They're in competition to some degree, but and we also, have to protect ourselves, and we eat animals, and even you could say, hey, still vegetables and the natural world, that's still part of the world as well. So but there is also a balance of just like if there's too much of one kind of animal or insect, then it can upset the balance of the ecology. And yeah, and so what I'm trying to say is that it seems like there's both this chaos and this order within it all.
It is. I mean, nature is incredible because when it comes to order, it's very ordered, right? But it's ordered in a way where everything, just by being itself in the most sincere and direct expression of itself that it is, everything fits. And it's like an emergent order. It's not a top-down order. It's the opposite of a commanded order. But yeah, even if everything fits on an ecosystem level, on an interconnectedness level, in a sense that the world will flourish if left to its own devices, to some degree. That's not the case for individuals, right?
Right.
There's that suffering, and the real question, I think, and something that I I wonder about is, or I guess I should say, your interpretation of that, and if that's okay, depends on how you see death, right?
Right,
Like
right.
someone's interpretation of if all of that is
Mm-hmm.
is acceptable or is terrible is what it means to be eaten by a predator.
Mm-hmm.
Val Plumwood, who's a panpsychist and an environmental philosopher, has this great anecdote of having been eaten partly by a crocodile.
Mm-hmm.
She it bit into her flesh, and she writes about being meat and what it feels like to be consumed, and that it's very challenging to our sense of
Mm-hmm.
of the individual self.
Right.
But in animistic societies, the way David Abram puts it, death isn't really a problem because there's no such thing.
Mm.
Your form changes.
Mm-hmm.
Emmanuel Cosia has a great book. My friend Sophie Strand recommended it to me. She's also someone to check out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. It's a book by Emmanuel Cosia called Metamorphoses, and he writes about how at the beginning of life we were all one organism and we shared one body, and nothing has changed since. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
it's like the first line of the book, and he
Mm-hmm.
talks about how birth is really just a transformation. It's just
Yeah.
it's a migration of life,
Well, and
not a
death. Yeah.
creation of life.
Both.
Yeah,
Right.
and death, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so in animistic cultures, there's nowhere for the soul to go except back into the earth, except into
Mm-hmm.
the intelligence that surrounds. And so things transmute, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't end.
Right. Energy is
And
neither created nor destroyed.
yeah.
Mm.
And so it's survival of the fittest if your priority is individual life.
Right.
And I think in the West, we think that's the highest good.
Mm.
We seem to think that individual conscious experience and individual human lives are the inalienable and unassailable principles of the good. And I am not at all saying that we should not think that individuals matter,
Mm-hmm.
or
Right.
that we shouldn't, that we should start questioning whether or not life is sacred, right? And like a
Mm-hmm.
certain life is sacred. But I do think that's not the highest good. I do think that there are things that we can sacrifice the individual self to. And I don't mean life. I mean like sacrificing a life. What I mean is that we can say there's something bigger, that we
Mm-hmm.
are, that in a Jungian sense, in an alchemical sense, we can transmute our sense of a solid atomic individual self into something that's much more interconnected. And that self is not as afraid of the mysterium tremendum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. That's beautiful. Which kind of leads me to my next point. Um, I think we've discussed. Oh, I think certain people or certain beliefs they want to emphasize the difference between humans and the rest of the world and say, hey, we're self-aware, we have this intelligence, we have this ability to step outside of our natural instincts or whatever, and um, you know have this co-creation and stuff like that. Um but I think I think that is important, and that's something to celebrate, but it's also important to celebrate um the that oneness, and that things have intelligence that we're still learning about, like dolphins or octopus or um that they have these unique intelligence that are worthy of celebration and exploration as well, and mycelium, which we kind of discussed a little bit.
Yeah, and it's all such different kinds of experience. I think
Right.
that when we compare everything to humans and we're trying to look for even the self-awareness tests that we give to certain animals to see if they
Mm-hmm.
can recognize themselves in mirrors, uh, to me, I'll be honest, I don't care much about that stuff. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
think it's interesting,
Right.
but I don't think it's philosophically important. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it's like how we're going to figure out if there are minds in other things, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that there are minds in anything. I don't think there's minds in us. I think mind is experience, like, or especially when it comes to, I guess that's getting into another conversation, but
Yeah, I had a conversation with my friend about AI recently, and that's
yeah,
yeah, I think you're getting there,
that is
but
a whole other conversation
oh
too.
yeah, it's great.
Um, but I think ethically, I guess what I'm
Mhm.
saying is ethically, when people talk about, oh, human life is most important, then maybe the higher animals, and then we're just recapitulating the scala natura. We're already
That
operating from the
hierarchy.
assumption, yeah, that
Mhm.
we're at the top, and then certain things that are more like us are close in value, and then less like us as it goes down the chain.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think that we are the arbiters of value. And I don't think that things that are more like us are more valuable or
Right.
more worth existing or
Mhm.
have more of a right to
Mhm.
be.
Mhm.
And I don't think that proving that creatures have intelligence that is like us says anything about whether or not they have experience,
Mhm.
that they have phenomenal consciousness, that they have raw felt worlds that they encounter. I don't think you can find that by looking at, well, I mean, there's a difference between having an experience of a world and having an awareness that you have an experience of the world, right? So I have consciousness in my dreams. I have
Mhm.
self-consciousness and meta-consciousness in my waking life where I can say, oh, I'm conscious. I can recognize
Mhm.
that. I know who I am. I know that I am. But
Mhm.
in my dream, I'm still experiencing.
Right.
And we don't know that a sea star or a mosquito or a tardigrade or a tree
Mhm.
or a mycelial network or even a lamppost. And I know that's going out there, but I think there's
Mhm.
reason to say that we can't decipher whether that has experience by looking at any quality of it. We can
Mhm.
only say we can only speculate on what kinds of experience it might have or
Right.
what
We
kinds it
say,
doesn't have.
oh, experiences the five senses, but that, our mind is also in our imagination. All these inner, these are experiences too. And so, how can we say, yeah, what is experience?
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is the hard problem of consciousness, which is,
Right.
yeah, the idea that you could map every neuron in the brain and you could show how every thought connects to every other thought, how every idea connects to every other idea, or emotion connects to every other emotion, what exact hormones are involved. You
Mhm.
could put this all on a grid. It wouldn't tell you the first thing about what it's like to feel any of that stuff, what the
Mm.
intrinsic nature of those experiences are.
Mhm.
It would just show how they behave in relation to each other or in relation to other things.
Mhm.
It's the same problem that uh, so there's this great book on panpsychism by the philosopher Philip Goff called Galileo's Error. And the error in the title, Galileo's Error, is in the formation of material science. The idea that Galileo basically said, science cannot tell us anything about the intrinsic nature of things, about the soul, about experience, but it can tell us about how the world appears to experience, how the world appears to with like from our point of view.
Mhm.
So um, it can tell us about the behavior of things. So it can tell us the quantitative things about things and their relationships, but it can't tell us the qualitative nature of
Mhm.
anything.
Right.
So science has proceeded that way for its entire history, and that's one of the reasons it's not ever going to be able to solve the problem of consciousness, because
Mhm.
consciousness is the very thing that was excluded from the inquiry to begin with.
Right.
It's in the structure of science never addressed that question.
Mhm.
Bertrand Russell has a critique of, it's not really a critique, but just he points out that physics doesn't explain anything because it's taking out someone else's laundry. In other words, you can show how particles interact with other particles, how things interact with other things, but you never have at any point anything at all on the intrinsic nature of those particles.
Mhm.
Um, and he himself, even though he's very much an analytic philosopher, very much a skeptic, advocated for a kind of neutral monism of consciousness is inherent in everything in some degree.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think there's good reason to start from that position.
Right. So, tell me the difference because I keep asking people and I don't have a clear idea still. What is the difference between idealism and panpsychism?
You know, there's a podcast called Walden Pod, which is the best podcast name that
Hmm.
I've heard. And it's by this guy named Emerson Green, and he has he asked the same question because there's a philosopher who maybe you're familiar with, Bernardo Kastrup, who
Yes, yes.
advocates
Hmm.
for analytic idealism,
Hmm.
and he differentiates it from panpsychism. And Emerson Green thinks, and I kind of agree, that this is mostly perhaps because he wants to have his name for the thing. And that's not, I mean, that's an ad hominem. I don't know. Like, it's
Right.
not about him specifically, but more
Hmm.
so that from the 10,000 foot angle, like
Hmm.
from far enough away, they look the same. They're for
Hmm.
all intents and purposes very similar.
Hmm.
Um, both of them, both of them claim that consciousness is the intrinsic nature of matter.
Hmm.
The difference is in the explanations. So, for how this could come about, or how this affects us. And for panpsychists, from my understanding, it comes about largely from the argument I was just laying out, that we don't know the intrinsic nature of matter. We know that the intrinsic nature of some matter, namely us, is experiential, has the
Hmm.
qualities of felt experience, that it is like something to be some matter. And because no amount, and I mean no amount, of scientific analysis or observation of the external world gets you one modicum closer to answering the question of what it is like to be anything,
Mm.
then why not presume, since we have a data point of one, that everything is that, right? Like, that's the
Hmm.
starting point.
Hmm.
There's no reason to assume there would be something like something called unconscious matter, or
Hmm.
inanimate matter, or non-experiential matter. Um, I mean, it's kind of an extension of the philosophical zombie argument. Like, I could say, which is the idea of a philosophical zombie is that there could is well, the question of the philosophical zombie is, how do I know that you're conscious?
Hmm.
Right? How do I know that you have experience? You could be an automaton programmed with neurons to be exactly like, how do I know I'm not the only conscious experience?
Right. Right.
I have to make assumptions, and I make
Hmm.
assumptions based on your similarities to me.
Mm. Right.
But if we then discover that no matter how much I look at your brain, I don't get 1 inch closer to understanding what it is like to be like something,
Hmm.
uh, I might know why you're angry when I do this if I look at your brain, or how you can conceptualize this and that. And like, I might be able to figure out the specifics of aspects of your consciousness, but I'll never even approach the question of that there is conscious experience. So if I can't figure that out by looking in detail about you,
Uh-huh.
why would I make the assumption that I mean, there's no place that
Right.
I should stop.
Right.
Not with animals, not with any other life, not even with non-life. There's no
Hmm.
reason to differentiate.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that's the panpsychist argument, or one panpsychist argument that I've
Hmm.
heard. The argument Kastrup makes involves that same premise,
Hmm.
but he uses the model of, well, he's trying to answer a question that's a problem for panpsychism, which is called the combination problem, which is the idea that, okay, so yes, it's like something to be you, but how do all of the consciousnesses inside of you combine to
Mm.
be you? Like, why, like, if every
Mm.
atom is
Yeah.
conscious, then why are you not just a bunch of atoms that are conscious? Like, why are you that are conscious? Like,
Right.
how does
A
consciousness,
collective.
yeah, like that,
Hmm.
that's a really tough question for panpsychists to answer,
Mm.
because if the world is created of is made of a bunch of stuff whose intrinsic nature is consciousness,
Hmm.
then you have to figure out how those consciousnesses can relate to one another.
Hmm.
Um, and this is where Kastrup, I think, makes a really strong argument, which is,
Hmm.
and I'm having to go back. It's been a little bit since I was reading his work. But his argument is the world is not made up of a bunch of stuff that is intrinsically conscious. The world is consciousness that appears as matter across the dissociative boundary of different alter identities of the dissociated mind of the cosmos. So to break that down,
Great job. I just want to congratulate you on remembering and saying that.
it's like I mean it's a really weird trippy idea, right? It's like
Right.
because he's trying to answer why he's also in addition to the combination problem, he's
You
trying to
could say
answer
like
yeah,
quantum field underneath
yeah,
that. Yeah.
absolutely. And he
Mhm.
talks a little bit about the quantum
Right.
connection there, which I do not know enough about to know one way
Uh,
or the other what that
uh-huh.
speaks to. Uh, but there's no combination problem there because there's no modicums of consciousness
Mm.
to that have to combine. But there's a new problem, which is how does a universal mind, how does consciousness as the fabric of existence
Hmm.
separate into me and you? How
Right.
come I'm not you?
Right. How do we think we're separate and why do we not share thoughts and all this, everything?
Exactly. Like why are
Hmm.
we experiencing ourselves as separate?
Hmm.
And his idea is based on the model of dissociative identity disorder.
Mm.
So in dissociative identity disorder, there are multiple alters of a personality, and you can
Ah,
swap
parts
between the
work.
alters. Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
little bit
Carl
like internal
Jung.
family systems. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Richard Schwartz. I've been
Hmm.
really into IFS recently too.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I
Good
think it's
stuff.
a beautiful nuancing of what's ultimately a Jungian psychology
Right.
that is very evocative. Uh,
Hmm.
Bill Plotkin in Wild Mind has a kind of eco-psychological version of internal family systems that I also find really, really attractive. Uh, so that's if you're into that, that's a really
Yeah.
good rabbit hole to go down.
Uh-huh.
Um, so yeah, so if we're different alters, then we are one mind.
Hmm.
We just have there's been a trauma
Right.
that has separated us from
Hmm.
the mind that we ultimately are all are.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
and he makes reference to a lot of the mystical traditions that talk about talk about difference as illusion. This is all
Hmm.
Maya.
Yeah.
This is all a game we're playing, but
Right.
really we're all one.
Right.
This is all just the river that says Om, right? It's
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
um so yeah, it's
Eh,
fascinating to me. I do
yeah.
find it a very attractive philosophy.
Right. And according to the stories, whatever you believe, the gurus, they remember their past lives and they remember all these things that's been separated from most of our memories. And that is that difference and that different experience or death that separates that it is all that one. So and
Mm-hmm.
then the telepathy, all these different things that they kind of point to this idea as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. I yeah, when it comes to paranormal stuff, I find myself waking up every morning with with a different
Uh-huh.
position.
Right, right.
I it's all such a mystery. Like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
so fascinating.
There's something there,
Yeah.
but what is it exactly?
Exactly. No, there is something there. There is something
Uh-huh.
there. There's no doubt.
Right.
But what is it? Right.
Yeah.
What like is it that I can read your mind? Is it that mind is of some substance that intersperses itself
Hmm.
slightly unevenly between us?
Hmm.
Is it that we're picking up on subtle unconscious things that are cueing us to
Hmm.
those epiphanies or those apparent resonances?
Hmm.
Or is it that we're all expressions of a universal mind that, like a mycelial network, pops up as a fruiting body in different places
Hmm.
at different times, but is ultimately part of one sense where it's like it's not that I'm communicating with you, but that we're both expressions of something that's thinking through us, so would
Right.
think those same thoughts or
Yeah.
would feel those same ways, or when so it's
Hmm.
there's so many possibilities for how that
Uh-huh.
works. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So obviously idealism, things like this, everything we've been talking about is fascinating. But I
Mm.
think the practical what does this mean? It means, yeah, we're all connected and we're all important and we all have this experience. We're all living beings in a way. And so have respect and empathy and care for each other. And we're on this relationship. So yeah, just how can we think of all of us in our relationship
Mm.
and yeah, how can we care for each other? And again, that survival together and flourishing.
I love that question. I'm really glad that you brought this back to the practical, because at the end of the day, as much as I love playing in the realm of ideas,
Right.
I care about all of this stuff because I am in love with the world
Hmm.
so deeply. And I kind of think of re-enchantment, which is really just the recognition of the already present enchantment, as a training to care. Like, it's how we open ourselves up to those things and have experiences of love and wonder. When we do that, we care. When we do that, we resonate with, we open our hearts to what else is around us, and then we get motivated. We get motivated to take action. We get motivated to make differences in our lives and in the lives of others, and to protect against the ravenous appetite of what uh, Robinson Jeffers thought of as like what was his term? Like some kind of like gross. I just have the image of it from one of his poems that was so
Hmm.
evocative. Like the Western world, the
Hmm.
modern world is this like grotesque machine that's eating
Hmm.
itself. That's like he talks about the severed hand
Hmm.
that it is, like kind of crawling along and destroying everything it sees.
Hmm.
Um, my work with wonder, with trying to encourage wonder, is an encouragement of attention. It's an encouragement of seeing what's there. I think that we've made
Hmm.
the world invisible, and when we make it
Hmm.
invisible, we can't care about it. We don't see what's invisible.
Right.
So the
We think we
recovery of
have
the
we've got it all figured out, so we don't need to examine it anymore because
Mhm.
it's already all discovered.
Absolutely. And the work is to suspend those judgments and pay deep
Hmm.
attention to what's there, to release the name of the thing and really look at it, to not assume that you understand a thing, but to deeply experience it, to not get lost in the left brain categorizations
Hmm.
of there's a book, The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. That's an excellent book by a neuroscientist on the relationship of the left and right brains. But he talks about how the left brain really should be the emissary of the right brain. And it's
I
because
love that.
it's a good bureaucrat.
Hmm.
It categorizes, it names,
Hmm.
but the right brain is where our raw experience is. And it's also where we put everything back together. And so we need to get more in touch with that, with um with really knowing in a familial way the world around us. And that openness and attentiveness. In my master's thesis, when I was writing about wonder, the whole middle of it is about attention, because I think attention to the
Mm.
world is how we get to wonder. And Mary Oliver said, I don't know what a prayer is, but I know how to pay attention. I know how to fall down on my knees and
Hmm.
honor the world around me. And my favorite part of that poem is, she says, uh, but what I'm concerned with is who made the grass? She's like, who made the world? Who made all this? And she
Hmm.
says, and who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. This
Mm.
one right here that is eating the sugar cube from the picnic or
Mm.
whatever it was. Like, I I'm so in awe of that, of those particularities, because that's where we find that enchantment.
Mm.
And the other world is the aliveness. Seeing, I mean, it goes back to what we are talking about at the beginning with imagination. Seeing the stick as a sword is not projecting onto the stick. It's seeing transparently through the stick into the sword that's waiting there. And it enlivens the stick with a magic that's bursting through everything all the time. And that we have just developed a kind of veiled gaze, what the Irish poet philosopher John Moriarty calls a Medusa mindset, where we look
Mm.
at everything and we actively are turning it all to stone, which leaves us in a universe of echoing hard rockiness that's devoid of all real sensation or quality,
Mhm.
and which we might as well pave over, because it's all just the flatness of pavement
Mm.
anyway.
Mhm.
It's all just mechanism. Why not turn it into a big machine? It already is one. And so that work of shifting into the state of immersive enchantment is so vital, because otherwise we don't even know what world we're trying to save. We don't
Mhm.
have a world we're trying to save if
Mm.
we're not in that state, if we can't
Mhm.
access that state. We're just trying to save a machine for the sake of another machine. Okay, who cares?
Mhm. Yeah. That's great. I love all that. I would love to talk another hour or two with you. I think we could.
Sure,
But
I'd be happy to.
I love this conversation. I appreciate all your wisdom and your insight, and yeah, it was amazing. I do have to get to work, so I have to end it here.
No problem. This was a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome.